Good evening, and a very warm welcome to the Vieira Center of Historical Research. As it is customary, but I really mean it, and I have to say thank you for being on time. And I appreciate you being here so that we can start this on time. Thank you so much. We are so delighted to see all of you here this evening, and especially those of you I see here for the first time. The exCenter primarily engages with the history of Goa through its own research activities in the library, as well as its art collection. After this session, please feel free to walk into our space and see the collection. This evening, we are delighted to have this history lecture delivered by Professor Claude Stuczynski. I hope I pronounced that right. Professor of History at Bar-Ilan University, Ramat Gan. And he will deliver a lecture on the Portuguese New Christians as agents of empire in India and beyond. Professor Claude Stuczynski is head of Department of General History at Bar-Ilan University and specializes in the Iberian Converso New Christian phenomenon and the early modern inquisitions from a theological political perspective. He has taught and published internationally and recently co-edited a Hispania Judaica bulletin, a special issue on the Converso Paulinisms, alongside multiple articles, including contributions to the Hermeneutical Jew studies in honor of Jeremy Cohen. His scholarship argues for studying Converso exclusion through a specifically theological lens and reassesses figures such as Father António Vieira. Current projects include editing unknown anti-Converso writings by Inquisitor Juan Adam de la Parra, research on conversos as imperial agents and victims, and an edition of a 1624 pro-Converso apology by a Portuguese New Christian. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. Today's history hour will be moderated by Dr. Frederick Noronha. Frederick Noronha is a researcher and independent publisher whose work examines media, technology development, and the history of publishing. He is the founder of the publishing house Goa 1556, which focuses on Goan history, culture, and society while advocating open knowledge and free open source initiatives. His academic research centers on 20th century literary production in Goa and the evolution of its print culture. His PhD thesis, From Text to Print, Case Study of Goa, analyzes fiction and non-fiction publishing in relation to the region's wider social and cultural context. Thank you, Frederick, as you always are over here. This history arc, I'll read the synopsis of this lecture. Portuguese New Christians as agents of empire in India and beyond. Departing from Jonathan Israel's definition of New Christians as ex-Converso Sephardic Jews, as both agents and victims of empire, this lecture examines how Portuguese New Christians and their supporters elaborated the idea that Christians of Jewish origin played a fundamental theological and economic role as significant agents of the Portuguese Empire in India, Brazil, and other colonial domains. Focusing on the crystallization of specific Portuguese identity as Christian members of the Hebrew nation and led by skilled men of commerce, the lecture will focus on new Christian and pro-Converso writers from the 17th century, such as Duarte Gomes Solis, Martín, Cellorigo, and Father António Vieira. Over to you, Professor Stuczynski and Dr. Frederick. Please take.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, you'll have to speak.
Oh,
Yeah.
Should I begin?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. I am asking you whether it is better without or with the microphone. Without. I knew. That is fine. First of all, I want to thank you all to come here. I hope you won't be disappointed. At least not so much. For me, it's a real dream to be here in Goa for several reasons. And the first is because I am not an historian of Goa. I am an historian on the Converso phenomenon, and specifically the Portuguese Converso phenomenon, which also was here, not only through the inquisitorial gaze, but also as people who were very important at certain points in different aspects, but not only commerce, but also as missionaries. For instance, Father Enriquez and others were Jesuits who had Jewish origin, and nonetheless, they were very successful and respected missionaries. Therefore, for me to come to go as a parvenu, it's really a great privilege. I am moved. Moreover, in my teaching, I used to, of course, refer to the case of Goa. I show to my students maps and pictures and engravings, and now to be here, you cannot imagine how I am pleased. Moreover, as having the great honor to have the opportunity to collaborate in many through many articles and projects of research with the Journal of Jesuit Studies, and I am in touch with leading historians of the Jesuit order, such as Robert Marix. For me, it's natural, and I feel at home to be here with you. Before I am beginning, I want to say three things. The first, I want to thank from all my heart to Professor Reinaldo de Souza. We didn't meet, we are now meeting for the first time today. For me at least, I think it's a love of the first gaze. And I was presented or connected to you through the good auspices of a colleague of mine in Lisbon, Professor Susana Mateus, who was here, and she told me that perhaps she will return. Susana is a very good and old friend, and when I told her that I dreamed to be here and to lecture in Goa, immediately she gave me your name. Thank you for your hospitality, as well as Dr. Frederic Noronha. It is a great pleasure to meet you. As you will listen, I hope you will listen your name during my talk, but not specifically you. another Noronha will appear in my talk. You will see. The second issue is that I have a very boring paper to read. I am doubting what is the better. Perhaps I will try to interact between the written and the oral. Perhaps it will be better. And I ask you, if some of the concepts are not enough clear, please don't hesitate. During the time of questions and answers, don't be shy, because you never know the public and what the public know and what doesn't know. Perhaps I will also say things that are obvious, but my forgiveness. But please, during the Q and answers, don't stay with any doubt, please. And finally, I come from a very difficult region today, and I wish also from here that peace and harmony between people will come soon. I pray for all my heart that people from different confessions, religions, nationalities will live peacefully together in the Middle East. This is my prayer, and this is what I try to do every day as a teacher in my university, with all my heart and all my forces. And thank you for welcoming me in such a friendly way. I want to begin my talk by stressing a certain profile or stereotype of the conversos, and the stereotype is attached to the mercantile activities. By that, I am stressing that even sometimes the conversos themselves, they, as usually with minorities, they attribute the stereotypes, the environment claimed or accused or told them, and they transform it from negative to positive. And I will focus especially on one specific converso. When I speak about Converso New Christian, I'm speaking of Christians who had Jewish ancestry. And in this case of Duarte Gomes Solis, he was a Portuguese New Christian, a pepper merchant, and he lived in Goa for a while, several times. 4 times he came to this place and returned to Portugal with a lot of adventures and misadventures. And I will fix especially on Duarte Gomes Solis, but I will also refer to other 2 persons. One is lesser known, Martín González de Cellorigo. He was a very important mercantilist thinker in Spain, and he also, astonishingly, he worked at certain time with the Inquisition, with the Spanish Inquisition, and finally with the well-known and admired Father António Vieira. I will refer briefly to him. Now, what do you see in the first slide is not at all Duarte Gomes Solis' words, but of a very known English adventurer and spy, Sir Walter Raleigh. He wrote in a book that was published after his death in the 50s, 1650s. I read, 50 years I say that the 4 named kings, especially the Spaniards and the Portugals, have ships of great bulk, but fitter for the merchant than for the men of war, for burden than for battle. But as Popelinier well observed, the forces of princes by sea are marks of the greatness of an estate. For whosoever commands the sea commands the trade. Whosoever commands the trade and of the world commands the riches of the world, and consequently the world itself. And these views, I will tell, well shared by many other mercantilist thinkers of his times, and including Duarte Gomes Solis. Now, Sir Walter Raleigh was quoting, Here, okay. The book Les Trois Mondes of Lancelot de la Popelinière, it's a book in which this Huguenot, a French mercantilist and historian, he lamented the fact that France didn't understand what the Spanish and especially the Portuguese understood. That it is important in order to govern the world, I will say, to put emphasis on 2 things, on sea and commerce. And this is precisely what Duarte Gomes Solis, by his way, he tries to say. In fact, we can tell you in a more erudite words, he endorsed an idea of, I will say, a thalassocratic idea of power and a mercantilistic idea of power. And this, of course, I don't have to remind you here, this was precisely the character of the Portugal's imperial enterprises in the parts that the Portuguese called Estado da India, I will tell very bluntly, in southern Asia, in the oceans. as among others showed Sanjay Subramaniam. In fact, the Estado da India was constructed from the idea that the Portuguese cannot occupy all this immense space. And the only way is to follow what they met for the first time in Northern Africa during the 15th, that is, by conquering and erecting outposts and fortresses in different parts, and only exceptionally has very circumscribed populations like Goa. And this thalassocratic centric or thalassocratic idea, that is, that you govern imperial space through the seas, were undermined at the time of Gomes Solis. They were undermined at least for two different reasons. There are more. The first of it is that by the end of the 16th century, from 1580, Portugal, the Kingdom of Portugal, became part of a common dynastic with the Habsburg kings based in Spain. And the problem was how to harmonize different geopolitical interests, not only in the Iberian Peninsula, but especially in the empires. Whether you can promote and invest in the New World, especially in Spanish America, or in Asia, or to put it, the things even in a more delicate way, after the conquest of the Philippines, whether the commerce must be led only through the Portuguese presence in India, in places like Macau and others, or you give the opportunity to the Spaniards to lead the same commerce with China and other places through Philippines. In fact, from the time of dynastical unions were very much tensions between ways of looking geopolitically at the region, and this was part of the union, the dynastical union. And many Portuguese, and among others, Duarte Gomes Solis, he was not the only one. He felt that since the union, the dynastical union of 1580, in fact, Portugal was paying the price of it, and the Spaniards were putting the main interest, geopolitical interest, in their interest in Spanish America and the Philippines. And we have then to see the thalassocratic and mercantilist views of Gomes Solis in this way, or in this context, as we say, challenged by this problem. But there were other reasons, and one of them, of course, you know also certainly, is the threatening presence of the Dutch and then the English through the commercial colonies, the commercial companies in Asia. From 1602, you know, the East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, and then especially after the fall of Hormuz to the Persians and the English commercial company, then people felt that the Portuguese were any more able to not only to dominate, but to lead successfully the commerce between Europe and Asia. And at the point that, you know, the two very well-known cases of juridical dispute, whether the Portuguese, they had the right from the papal donations of the 15th century to have dominion over the Indian Ocean, or whether, following Grotius and part of the Roman law, the sea are like air. like air. Therefore, you cannot have any possession of air or sea. Then you have to endorse a politics of open seas, mare liberum, which was the idea of Grotius. And what I am telling about that because Duarte Gomes Solis, he lives this moment of crisis. This moment of crisis. That, as I was said, it was caused, among others, by these two different things: inner problems and external problems. Now, the problem was that at that time, I am referring from the end of the 16th century to the first, to at least to the time that Duarte Gomes passed away in the early 30s of the 17th century. Both in Spain and Portugal, there was a very important awareness of the crisis. And to mention just the very important contribution, pioneeristic contribution of John Eliot on the self-consciousness of crisis in Spain. In other ways, what I am trying to say is that even in the Iberian Peninsula, there were many Portuguese and Spaniards, they were self-aware that in fact we are anymore living in times of imperial apogee led by Spain, but in times of crisis, But crisis not only in the Indian Ocean, crisis everywhere, a kind of structural crisis in religion, in culture, etc. And among one of the paradoxical byproducts of this crisis, because crises are very hard, but sometimes led to creativity, to human creativity, we find, among others, Don Quixote of Cervantes, precisely in moments where you are frail and you are checking what is going on. Why I am telling you that? Because the majority of people at that time who tried to suggest to kings ways of putting to the end of this crisis, especially by writing projects of reform, that they were called in Spanish arbitrios, in Portuguese alvitrios, the kind of projects of different sorts. There were a lot of them, especially in the 10s and the 20s and the 30s of every sort you can, but they were very few who focused on the precise problem of Portuguese Asia. Again, because many thought that the problem is overall and not focused on the region. Now, Duarte Gomes Solis, he tried to attract the attention and to tell, we have here in this space a specific problem, we have to put, to try to amend it. And why to amend it? Because this problem is especially sensible to the interest of Portugal. In other ways, many of the arbitristas, when they wrote and they offer ways to amend the structural problems of their times, they didn't take enough into consideration the problems seen from Lisbon or from Goa and from Macau, but rather from Madrid or from Mexico or from Peru, to tell you just in a way. And just I will give you an example, another English, but this one, he was a Catholic English. He came to Persia, and he you know, he was a kind of globetrotter. He went to the court in Moscow and St. Petersburg, really a big traveler. And he was not a merchant. he was a spy, and at a certain moment of his life, he renders his service to the Habsburg. Then he was, in the eyes of the English, a traitor, not only because he was Catholic, but also because he supported the enemies of the Spanish Empire. Now, in 1622, Anthony Shelley wrote a kind of document that I think it is an arbitrio too, despite the fact that he didn't put in this way, named The Political Balance of the Entire World, El Peso Político de Todo el Mundo. And after reviewing all the world together, by taking as a model for those, Giovanni Botero description of the world, he arrived to geopolitical considerations. I returned and quote another of the fantastic contributions of Professor Subramanian from UCLA, because he demonstrated how Shelley viewed the world as a geopolitician. And although he was not a thalassocratic per se, he saw that the way a big empire can control the world is not by controlling every place, because you can't, but it is by controlling neuralgic places. Now, if you control, for instance, the Strait of Hormuz, you are done. You are done for an entire region. And this is the way he operated. Now, Shelley was sensitive, like, as I will show, Gomes Solis, to the thalassocratic character of Portuguese Estado da India, and yes, to the need to give a remedy to the fact that the British and the Dutch were controlling more and more the seas, that many of the ships, the cargoes loaded with merchandise, they shipwrecked because they were made very poorly at that time in the Carreira da Indias, in the convoys that came from Lisbon. And he gave a solution. And the solution he wrote in this tract, he addressed it to the mighty minister at that time, the Count Duke of Olivares, the mighty minister of Philip IV, was to build a very unified armada that would control the world, the seas of the world, including Portuguese India. Moreover, he also supported to invest more in the axis between the Philippines and Asia. And you can imagine what it meant, and Olivares was very sensitive to Shelley's advices. It was meant for many Portuguese to fragilize even more the autonomous span they had in Portuguese India. In other words, by endorsing yes thalassocratic, yes mercantilistic, but centralistic and Spanish-centric policies, many Portuguese, they felt that Olivares, following Shelley, will, instead of supporting their interests, their colonial and imperial interests, they will the contrary. Now, it is time to introduce Duarte Gomes, first of two arbitrios he published and by his own cost, under his own cost, the discourses about the commerce of the two Indies, 1622. Why I am showing now the first of his big arbitrios. He wrote different documents in the 10s to other important members of the Habsburg dynasty in Madrid and before that in Valladolid. But this is one of his main 2 books or arbitrios. Why I am talking? Because I don't have here the time to show, it will be too boring, because I believe that Shirley's book, El Peso de Todo el Mundo, and now Gomes Solis, one reacted against the other. In fact, I can prove that from reading the stuff that Shirley's El Peso de Todo el Mundo departed from having read Duarte de Gomes' book. Why I know? Because he attacks some of Duarte de Gomes Solis' views and profiles. For instance, he said, Shirley, I don't take care of arbitrios that were written by merchants because they are self-interested. They don't care about the well-being of the empire. Secondly, because one of the things that Duarte Gomes Solis suggested is to raise the price of silver. To raise the price of silver. I cannot enter into the details. And Shirley said this is the most foolish thing to do now, to raise the price of silver. Perhaps because Shirley had in mind the access from Manila to China and not from Goa or Macau through Lisbon. I just quoted here 2 among his many ways of endorsing thalassocracy and mercantilism. For the force of lordship in India was the sea, you read here at your left, and trade is the sinews of the Portuguese conquest. He is a thalassocratic, mercantilistic, and as Shirley, he wants to make changes. But the changes he made were of different kind. Instead of supporting, like Shirley, a centralized government from Madrid, on the contrary, what Duarte Gomes said, what the king has to do is to support all these individual plans and initiatives, especially endorsed by Portuguese merchants. Why? Because until now, were the Portuguese merchants who, on behalf of the King of Portugal, they contribute to the prosperity of the Estado da India, to Portugal's India. Then the most appropriate things to do is, yes, to build again a better navy. Yes, to be more, more swift in the way of administrating the Estado da India. But we have to give and to support those people who, from the times at least of King Sebastian, that is the 70s, the 1570s, they led the commerce between Portugal and India, and then the conquest of India, and those were the merchants. Now, and here I enter into the core of my talk. For Gomes Solis, although he speaks again and again about the Portuguese merchants, how they are useful, how they are truthful, how they always did the best to Portugal interests in the Estado de India. He also almost always referred to the Portuguese merchants as synonymicals with New Christian merchants. Always. For him, the New Christian, the merchant, not all the New Christians were merchants, but the colonial merchants were New Christians, to put it bluntly. But the problem was that in Portugal itself, and at that time, those trustful merchants, instead of being supported, instead of being raised into the lesser nobility of Portugal, they were suspected of being Judaizers. They were persecuted by the Inquisition, and moreover, through the infamous laws of purity of blood, they were not enabled to have access into important institutions, universities, sometimes types of nobility, orders, the church, and whatsoever. And therefore, he claimed, what happened is that those merchants, although they were truthful and useful, he said, yes, they were among us, some Judaizers. But the vast majority, like myself, we are deeply Catholics. Then instead of supporting, the reality was the contrary. Therefore, and this is a very important point, in order to stress the thalassocratic and mercantilistic character of Portugal's Asia, a sort of solution has to be found vis-à-vis the Converso merchants in terms of their possibility to be seen as a good, byproduct of the Portuguese society, and not as pariahs, suspectful heretics, etc., etc., etc. Now, this leads me to a little bit explain how Solis, Gomes Solis in his Arbitrios, he depicts the merchant. On the one hand, he sees the empire, he sees the world through the prism of a merchant. For instance, he said not only that the merchants are the sinews of the republic, but they say that the merchant is more wiser and better than the professor at the university or the judge. Why? Because the merchant has the legs on the ground. He doesn't work in theory, but he has to solve problems. Second, and most importantly, because the basis of any international merchant is trust, to trust. Again and again he speaks about credito, and credito has to be with lending money, but also to trust in yourself. Then those merchants who are habituated to make business with others and taking responsibility and giving trust, these are the people who are needed more than any other in those vast domains, he said. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, it is very interesting how he depicts other aspect of the Portuguese merchant in India and in the Estado de India and in the East. For instance, he quotes from Giovanni Pietro Maffei, historiarum indicarum, the fact that the first Jesuits arrived to Japan with the help of merchants. Again, explicitly only said merchants, but in other places, when he said merchants are Christians of Jewish origin. He said himself that in India, the merchants like himself, ipso facto, not only they supported mission and missionaries, because without the money and the facilities of the merchants, there are no way of promoting mission against the unbelievers. He said many times, the merchant, by giving his example, he turned to be both a soldier and a missionary. In other ways, you know how he tried to overemphasize the role of the merchant by giving them a role that was always discussed in the literature of their time concerning the Portuguese imperial domains in the East. What we have to invest more in soldiers? What about mission? The response of Gomes Solis, merchant. The merchants enables both. Now, in many respects, he endorsed the writings of another arbitrista, Martín de Cellorigo. This time is a Spanish one. He was a licenciado who even worked on behalf of the Inquisition. And nonetheless, in 1619, he published this booklet. And it is very important, this booklet, because in the name of certain Portuguese individuals, and afterwards we will know that these Portuguese were the elite of the new Christian merchants. I give now proposal to change, to take Spain from the crisis. And one of the proposal is like Gomes Solis, to put to an end to indiscriminated persecution against new Christians, to indiscriminate exclusion grounded on purity of blood, and on the contrary, he supported the idea, like Gomes Solis, that the King of Spain has to support miscegenation, marriages between the higher among the merchants, the Converso merchants, the new Christian merchants, and the lesser Iberian nobility. Why? Because only in this way, the Iberian nobles in Portugal or in Spain will understand that to be a merchant is not to have a debased activity, not fitting to the nobility. And Cellorigo says, look at England, look at Holland, look at northern Italy. You will see there that within the aristocracy, you have nobles who are at the same time merchants. Yeah, merchants, yeah. Shakespeare, the Merchant of Venice, Don Antonio is a Christian merchant. He's not Shylock. Shylock is not a merchant. They say this is the model, the way to change the problems of decay, not only economic, but to transform Spain and Portugal into meritocratic societies, into societies that they push people who want to succeed and to contribute to the well-being of the monarchy of the people, is to give a merchant ethos, at least if not all, to part of the nobility. And since we have the Conversos, and the richest among them, there are merchants, then the best way is to promote the Conversos, to give them titles of nobility, to enable them to study in universities, etc., and to push them to intermarry with all Christians. I am approaching to the end. Gomes Solis in 1628, he wrote another arbitrio, very quickly I will say, because I see that the time is running. In this arbitrio, among many other things, he said, perhaps a good solution is to look at what the Dutch and the English, they created the societies of commerce. Let's do the same. And he proposed to the kings, there were kings of Spain and Portugal at the same time, that is, Philip IV was also Philip III of Portugal, to found a Eastern Company of Commerce with New Christian capital, with New Christian merchant capital. And indeed, as shown among others, a very distinguished scholar, Chandra da Silva, in 1628, the same year. Finally, the king accepted and a company of commerce to India was founded, but it didn't stay long for many reasons, and part of it because it was not led by an integration of the Converso elites. To turn to Duarte Gomes Solis, when you read his arbitrios, his both 22 and 28, he was one main hero. And the main hero of Duarte Gomes Solis was Don Manuel, King Don Manuel. Now, perhaps some of you don't remind, or don't you know, it was the same Don Manuel who forced the Jews to convert to Christianity in 1497. But it was Don Manuel who, during his time, Vasco da Gama arrived to Calicut and Pedro Álvares Cabral to Brazil. For Gomes Solis and other Portuguese merchants, and not only, Don Manuel incarnated the apogee of the Portuguese Empire. But in his case, Don Manuel was an hero also because not only he supported commerce and the dominion of seas, but also because on the one hand, according to Gomes Solis, he converted the Jews to Christianity in order to save their souls. But on the other, Don Manuel was reluctant to establish an inquisition and try to support at least the more able among the New Christians. Now, this corresponds to the scene you see here, is the Arch of Triumph that was erected by the merchants of Lisbon. Most of them were conversos, New Christians, in 1619, when Philip III of Spain, that is Philip II, visited Lisbon. Just a word, there was a major festivity that was very expected by the Lisbon population and the Portuguese one, because they expected that the king perhaps will move from Madrid to Lisbon, and especially he will change all his geopolitical views of empires, and instead of neglecting the Portuguese interest, on the contrary, he will say, okay, the silver of Potosi is fine, but the commerce with India is even more important. And during the festivities, the most important arch, most luxurious, you can see in Jean Baptista de la Baña engraving at your left, at the docks, was erected by the merchant community of Lisbon, and here you have in the center a bigger view. Now, what I emphasize with arrows are the armilliar spheres. And this is to tell that to put an armilliar sphere was not innocent. As you know, this was the symbol of Don Manuel's project of conquest and mission and commerce according to his imperial views. Therefore, no wonder if Gomes Solis also in his book, he say we have to return to Don Manuel, to the policies of Don Manuel, by integrating and promoting the ex-Converso and by supporting the Portugal interest in India. Moreover, he quoted also from João de Barros, The Decade of Asia, and especially a chapter in which de Barros, well, he was somewhat embarrassed why King Manuel adopted among his many titles not only the Lord of the Navigation and the Conquest, but also the Lord of Commerce, Señor do Comercio. For Duarte Gomes Solis, this was great, because this was the proof that for this king, commerce was not a bad thing. It was vital to the interest of Portugal. Now, finally, and I am finishing, a mention of a manuscript a colleague of mine found in the British Library, in which, from 1630, in which a person tried to offer a kind of alternative, I think an alternative to Gomes Solis Arbitrios, according to which you don't know who was, we have to expel all the new Christians from Portugal, no matter if they were Judaizers or not, like the Moriscos in Spain years before, and put them in ghettos in the coast of Africa. And by this way, these people were not have any other possibility but to make commerce in a forceful way. This project, I will claim, is a kind of parody of Gomes Solis Arbitrios. Now, a point that I have to say is that one of the incredible things of Gomes Solis is that he called the kings to enable Jews who lived in the Mediterranean or in Holland, if they wished, to come to India as merchants. But many scholars, they thought that this was made because a kind of identification with their religion. It's not. I will briefly say it was because he said he saw in the thalassocratic and mercantilistic specific character of the Estado de India, the Portuguese India, a place that you can do it, because never in his other writings mentioned the possibility to accept open Jews in Portugal or in Brazil. No. Moreover, Duarte Gomes Solis, he not only defined himself as a Catholic, very proud and devotee, indeed of Hebrew origin, but a Catholic. And he mentioned that, yes, we have to integrate the new Christians within the society, the Portuguese society, but those new Christians who will be imprisoned and sentenced by the Holy Office, by the Inquisition has to expel them. Not everyone, but just the heretics among them. In other words, Gomes Solis tried to make a clear contradistinction between a Catholic member of the Hebrew nation and some who were heretics. And finally, 3 minutes, just this excerpt, if you can read it very quickly, and also a mention from Martín de Cellorigo book, and of course the writings of the Jesuit fathers António Vieira, yeah, to mention that in all of the three, Duarte Gomes Solis, Martín de Cellorigo, and Father Vieira, there was a kind, I will say, stereotype, or I will rather call it theological, economical idea, according to which people, Christians or Jews, but people who have Hebrew ancestry, were blessed by God as people who are good merchants, good physicians, and good scientists. In fact, I don't have the time, but this is a secularized way to understand the chapter 11 of St. Paul's, of Romans, according to St. Paul, the idea that on the one hand, the people of Israel who didn't believe in Christ were put a little bit aside, like dry branches of the olive tree, but God will never forget that they are part of this promise, His promise. And then will come the time where those Jewish branches who converted to the Christian faith, or were still in the olive tree, the original olive tree grafted with branches from the Gentile olive tree. But also the dry branches, to put it more simply, they will be saved finally. They will be saved. And I just will read the final verses here. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are, that is the professing Jews, enemies for your sake, but as far as election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. There is something in the origin of the Hebrew people, according to the interpretation of Gomes Solis, of Martín de Cellorigo, and Vieira. I can add other names that still reminded that these people, even when they converted to Christianity, and even more, like you can see in the excerpt of Cellorigo, they continue to have the blessing of God. And according to Cellorigo, to Vieira, and to Duarte Gomes Solis, one of the spheres in which you can see the blessing of God is in the economic sphere. And here it is very important because on the one hand it seems to be the adoption of a prejudice, of a stereotype, but on the other hand these three persons, they believed, and Duarte Gomes was a new Christian himself and a proud Catholic of Hebrew origin, that to be blessed in economy is not bad. It's not bad. It's very important in order to spread the gospel around the globe by the means of the Portuguese imperial enterprises. Thank you very much.
So that was a very nice and fascinating talk, broad and covering the full gamut of issues and also specific enough with examples. I was all the time trying to take lessons from, should I put it off? Yeah, take lessons from what you were saying to maybe the experiences of Goa and thinking of maybe Goans as victims and also beneficiaries of a system,
exactly.
which we haven't spoken much about. Of course, this small place also has had the benefit of a lot of Jewish researchers coming here and doing very interesting and insightful work, starting with, Robert Newman, and before that there were also others, and Paul Axelrod and quite a few others who have given us interesting insights. There are many professors of history here today who have gained a lot of benefits from the points you made, I'm sure. I'll leave it open to a Q&A. We have some time to go, but my request is be brief. Questions are welcome, observations are welcome, reactions are welcome. Be brief, introduce yourself your name, because everyone else wants to know whom they are listening to, and go ahead with that. If you are brief, we'll have time for more questions. Yeah? Someone will have a round of mind. Anyone wants to take that first question? Yeah, please, Professor Raphael. Still we need your name.
Raphael Finance. I was a little intrigued in the photo of the ark that we of which you showed. The middle has America inscribed there. And I was wondering what that inscription of America has with whatever you were saying.
Sorry,
The photo of the ark that we of which you showed erected by the merchants.
Sorry?
The photo of the Arc de Triomphe has America.
Yeah. Yes,
Very prominent.
yeah. Well, the arch itself was built in the following way. Philip III or the second was going out from the big boat and ships with a lot of dances, and it was a kind of a big festivities with fireworks and people disguises like mythological characters swimming. It's kind of baroque. It was a baroque entrée royale, a baroque festivity, and the arch that was built with the money and the initiative of the merchants of Lisbon was built in the way that the monarch entered into the docks through the arch America with the image of King Philip II, the prudent king, that is Philip I, according to the Portuguese dynasty, with different kinds of allegorical and symbolical stuff. In the two other sides were also symbolic representations with different kings of Africa and Europe. And finally, just the opposite side was Asia. And what is interesting is that in the part of Asia, it was behind America, was the image of King Manuel, and one allegorical image was holding a big cross, symbolizing mission in Asia. Your question was very important because I claim, I even published something about that all these festivities were a unique occasion for people like the New Christian elites, not for all the New Christians, but the entrepreneurial elites, to show that they are good for Portugal and for the kingdom. They are not men associated with the Inquisition or heresy, but they are agents of empire and not only victims of empire. And that is why they wanted so much to give a kind of symbolic lesson to the king. Yes, you enter from the Spanish interest, Spanish America, but when you come to Lisbon, you have to take in mind that here we follow Asia. We are follow the Indian part. And this is what you have to do now, to invest all your forces in the Asian question. You are neglecting it. Moreover, among the many festivities during this visit, you have, of course, a theatrical representation by the Jesuits. And the king attended, and we have the script. And the script is an adaptation of Luis de Camões' Lusíadas to celebrate how the Portuguese were the Argonauts, and they fighted heretics and enemies and all sorts of monsters to arrive to India and spread the faith in Christ. Do you understand? It was a festivity who had a very loaded political message. And the message was, in general, you are our king. We Portuguese, you are Philip II, that is Philip III from Spain. But you are also Philip II. Please, now, invest more on what we need. We are decaying. We are impoverishing. We are lost in places and interest in Asia. Please do something. This was the message. And the new Christian merchants, they had a sub-message. And the sub-message is, yes, do that. And by doing that, you will understand that we, the entrepreneurial bourgeois elite, we are truthful and helpful.
There are layers within layers, and every interesting question you ask unfolds a new talk by professor. So,
Interesting. Was there a concept of the prosperity gospel? We hear of the prosperity gospel now. When you talk of converts and that they are prospering, was there a concept of prosperity gospel at that time?
Yes, a very, very important question. What I try to also claim is that when these persons are mentioned, that is Vieira, in some way Cellorigo, Duarte Gomes Solis, but also the merchants through this arch, when they celebrated the policies of Manuel, they somehow tried to recreate what a very important Portuguese scholar, historian, Felipe Tomás, he called the Manueline imperial idea. And according to Felipe Tomás, and I am not speaking about 1619, but during the time of Manuel, when Manuel adopted the armillary sphere, Felipe Tomás, not Manuel, Felipe Tomás, I will remember his name for sure. He adopted the armillary sphere, but the armillary sphere had a polysemy. It was the instrument, like a fixed astrolabe, the instrument that enabled the conquest, but at the same time, it enabled the evangelization and the mission around the globe. If you see here, in the armillary sphere, in Manuel's armillary sphere, you find an excerpt, Spera indero et hac voluntatem, from the Psalm. Believe in God, expect God, and you will be prospered, and you will prosper. Now, why King Manuel adopted that? And I return to Felipe Tomás, because according to Felipe Tomás, in Manuel's courts were a group of Christians who were millenarians, followers of, sorry to say, it's a little bit complex, of the writing of Joachim de Fiore. By the way, millenarianism resounds in Vieira for sure. And what is millenarianism in a nutshell? Millenarianism is the idea that before the end of times, according to the gospel, before the Antichrist, will be almost 1,000 years in which the devil will be in chains. This is according to the book of Revelation, chapter number 20. Now, in the Middle Ages, Joachim da Fiore, and in the court of Manuel, they interpreted in this way. The discoveries, so-called, and the conquest and the evangelization are tangible proofs that we are entering into the millennium. We are entering in this last fast of history before the end of history, before the eschaton, before the Antichrist and the final judgment. And this will be the most supreme time of our earth, in which, and this is your point, religion and spirituality on the one hand, and earthly prosperity will come together. This is according to Joachim de Fiore. The final moment, the moment of the same spirit, or what Father Vieira claimed, the fifth empire, or the reign of Christ on earth, is a moment in which everyone will become Christian, and at the same time the humanity will attend a moment of happiness also, not mainly, but also in earthly spheres. Abundance, felicity, prosperity. It's not richness. It's not richness just to buy something new. It's to share this prosperity with the humanity itself. And this is the millenarian vein that people like Galvão and others, they influenced it on King Manuel said, look, you are discovering that Christianity is spreading. We are entering perhaps in this new phase. Now, people like Gomes Solis and especially Vieira, they claim time came to try to fulfill this moment. But as Vieira said, and I didn't have the time to refer more to him, in the back, he said, in the bag of the merchant comes the mission, or something like that. In other words, for Vieira, God's providence showed us that you use something terrestrial means to attain spiritual goals. In other words, prosperity, richness, wealth, not to be unfair with others, but to make happier the world, is also a means to propel the name of Christ in the world. And finally, this world, before the end of time, will be a Christian and prosperous world. Because, yes, you are right, in the Christian tradition, there were many people who said, no, earthly prosperity is the base, is matter, is the devil, and spiritual prosperity is only good. That is why the inquisitors, they accused Father Vieira. He underwent inquisitorial trial by being a Christian Judaizer, by telling your idea of Fifth Empire resembles to the Jewish messianic idea of prosperity. And Father Vieira said, no, I am sorry. I am Christian. But yes, we will attain a spiritual moment of plenitude, but this can only arrive in history, with human means, and not with things that will happen out of the blue, because we are still in history. The idea of the millennium is that this moment of apogee is in history with natural things and not yet with supernatural, developments. This will occur after, with the Antichrist and the raising of the dead and the final judgment according to the book of Revelation.
Fine. Anyone? One question to Annabelle, because she's the latest to have submitted a thesis, which is a very large thesis on the village of Karamboli. So maybe your responses to Professor Claude, or just a reaction or whatever. Sorry for putting you in the mess.
Thanks. I don't know if I should say thank you or something on the contrary. Thank you, Professor, for that very interesting talk. In your studies, did you come across anything regarding the Jews in Goa per se? First.
Very, very important question. No, nothing. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. Gomes Solis doesn't care. And I will tell you probably why. But it is not all the question. He doesn't care because the Jews lived in old Goa, in the periphery, in the Rua dos Judeus. Yeah, I was today for the first time. They live until more or less the establishment of the Inquisition. After the establishment of the Inquisition, those Jews was a special permit to come and to be in Goa. Anymore they couldn't come from the 60s. Yeah. But you can ask me another question about what about the Jews of Cochin or different parts of Kerala? No word. No word. Duarte Gomes Solis doesn't care about them. He's very respectful for inhabitants of India. They say there are some people, I don't have the time now, they are very skilled, very smart. There is no racism in his books, at least vis-a-vis the local population. He is very admirative, but it's not the only one, vis-a-vis the Chinese. China is a kind of, but even vis-a-vis the Turks and the Persians. He, like Shirley, in this sense, they agreed. They said to the monarchs, don't do any war against the Turks or the Persians. First, we can't. Second, our main enemy are the Dutch and the British and the English. Then please do peace with them, do a lot of commerce, and all of us will prosper. But he didn't pay attention to the Jews of Cochin, for instance. And one of the reasons that could be because they do not fit into his expectation of skilled international merchants, perhaps.
Last question before we wind up. Yes, please.
Thank you for that interesting subject you have spoken of. So I have two questions actually, so I can expound on. One is you mentioned about the Inquisition being practiced on Jews. So where, in which part of the world, or which part of the country was it? In India, in Goa, or where was this Inquisition being practiced? And the second question is, you have a wonderful collection of books you have referred to. So how did you assess the books and where were you able, what gave you the idea of searching for these books and getting information from these books?
I hope that I understood the second question. If not, I will ask you to ask again. Concerning the first question, what I claim is that since the time the Inquisition was established in Goa, open Jews were not permitted to live. open. But New Christians were. And that is why among the victims of the Goan Inquisition were New Christians also. Not only, not the majority as you know, but were New Christians. In other words, the Inquisition basically has not jurisdiction over Jews, over Muslims, over Hindus, over people who are not Christians. They have no jurisdiction. The only jurisdiction they have is in two cases. If the person converts to Christianity, he's seen from canonic law Christian, then he's not behaving properly. If a crypto Muslim, you are persecuting him not because he is a Muslim, but because he is a Christian who behaves like a Muslim. And the same with the New Christians. It's not because they are Jews, it's because they are behaving as Jews. They are heretics. And this is a very important point to stress in general when we talk about the Inquisition. But it is true that the Inquisition has some policies that have indirect consequence on the environment. And seems to be that the Inquisition made pressure on the Goa government not to allow these persons, these open Jews, to be in Goa. Probably why? Because there were a lot of New Christians who lived there, and the accusation will be, or the suspicion will be, if you have Jews close to you, you New Christian, you probably will sometimes come to them in order to pray, in order to have some Jewish ceremony. And that is why, that in other words, it's not the Inquisition of Goa that persecuted Jews, no. But indirectly, because of his anti-New Christian policy as Christian heretics, they asked that the Jewish presence will be any more there. This is the point. Now, regarding the second question was about the books, I showed many books. Okay, the books. Okay, well, I show just part of the books Duarte Gomes Solis employed. Of course, I went to different libraries or today through the website and made copies, like copy-paste of these books. But also I went to see what they wrote in order to double-check if Gomes Solis quoted correctly or not and why. Now, I just gave some examples, Maffei, João de Barros. Also, for those who know Portuguese history, he quotes a lot Damião de Goes, history of the King Manuel I. And thanks to your question, I will say the following, which is important. If you ever try to read Duarte Gomes Solis' Arbitrios, the both of them, and his documents, you will find that his prose is horrible, repeats himself, a lot of mistakes, he's very prolix. And even the government, the Spanish government, when they received those things, they despised the way of writing. And he himself sometimes he said, you know what, perhaps I am repeating myself, perhaps I am not enough clear, but I am on the ground. I am telling things that I see and touch. I am not in the theory. And this can lead us to the idea that Duarte Gomes de Solis was an anti-intellectual, a man of action. He wants to earn money. But no. He quotes De Barros, he quotes Maffei. He wants to read books. And this tells a lot, very interesting, not only to my topic, to the culture of the merchant at that time. their culture, their bookshelves, their libraries, is not that the library of a cleric, churchman, or a university professor, but sometimes you find a lot of surprise and very autonomous ways of building your own knowledge. And this is very interesting. I believe that some of you read the classic, fantastic and important book of Carlo Ginzburg, the Cheese and the Worms. How a person who has a mill in northern Italy, he had some books, he read a little bit, how he could build an entire worldview, very, very complex, autonomously from the high wisdom of the universities or the church or whatsoever. And now we have more and more research on people who were not on the elite, intellectual elite, including people who were tried by the Inquisitions. And then sometimes you discover that they didn't pertain to the academic elite, to the scholarly elite, but they were curious, smart, and inventive people. Very inventive people. And this is perhaps a call to be more sensitive to the wisdom of people who did not share the hegemonic culture and elite of certain times, to listen how do they create the alternative way of thinking. And this is a very, very interesting case.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor. It's fascinating, and if we went on for another 2 or 3 hours, there would still be more to hear, but we are running out of time. So I'll end the session here. Thank you so much for being a lovely audience, for giving your interesting feedback and questions, and we end now.